let me ask you this question. I would like to ask the AG to propose legislation for what we call small claims court. There are lots of poor people, to an example you just gave, that they have issues with others and sometimes with large firms, but the lawyer fee is greater than the fee you're claiming.
It is their
right.
Yes. A right, the right that someone has. All of our rights exist in context.
What's the context of a second medical opinion?
Because you're disrespecting the process.
No.
Jesus, this is common sense, man.
Any situation which you seem to do, you're just dealing with Afro-Guyanese issues. If one, you can't bring and pull the leaders of the African community together, you're failing. And if two, you can't put forward a vision, a blueprint, and a plan for African Guyanese, you're failing as well.
Pleasant Wednesday evening to you. This is the Freddie Kissoon Show. He appeared on this program 3 years ago when he had published his latest book. Now his latest book is being presented Saturday, the 20th of June at 5 p.m. at Grand Coastal Inn. And that book is by one of Guyana's prolific academic, Dr. Baytoram Ramharack. And this is the book that will be presented to Guyana. The Wismar Massacre, a case of ethnic cleansing of Indians in Guyana. This is Dr. Ramharack's sixth book. Just let me read the previous 5. Centenary celebration of the arrival of Indians to British Guyana, 1838-1938. Against the Grain, Baytoram Singh Roy and the Politics of Guyana. Jung Bahadur Singh of Guyana, politician, ship doctor, labor leader, and protector of Indians. A powerful voice, Alice Bhagwandai Singh, reflections of her work in Guyana. And 1 Dotty Bill, a village in Guyana, the story of Hari Prashad and Prashad Nagar. It's 5 books, and now the 6th one. Once again, I'll put it up so the operators can focus on it. And this book will be launched on Saturday, 5 p.m., Grand Coastal Inn at Lewis Souvenir. Without further ado, Dr. Ramharack, thanks for being here. And let me start with the back of the book, that this project on the Wismar Massacre has engaged you for the past 20 years? Well, so 20 years you've been taking an interest in this, researching it, and this is the final product.
It is a final product, but when we say 20 years, you know, I've raised a family in between, I've done some other work, some of which you've mentioned, but 20 years on and off, primarily because some of the documents are archival, right? There are some that are online, but let's say for instance, the secret telegram between Governor Late and his main office, you know, in London, some of them were lodged in the University of Cape Town because he was from South Africa. So
yeah, I see you traveled to Cape Town, yeah.
I didn't actually travel, but they sent me whatever files that they had on him. And everything that he had donated, but the archival material came from the University of Cape Town, and of course the London Archive and the archives here. So so it took a while to get that together, but I think one of the most important aspects to this project is the fact that I have relied on the narrative of many people, hundreds of people, some of them who are not mentioned in the book, and we can talk about that. But the names of those who helped me along the way are there. I've conducted a lot of interviews because I know from the get-go that this is a subject matter that's going to be controversial. So I wanted to take myself out of it as much as I can and let the folks who are connected, whether it's the police officers, you know, the British government, the Guyana government, British Guyana government at that time, and so on, and the people involved to be part of the narrative. So the story is coming from them. So that's why it took a while to get this out, because it had to be revised, it had to be peer reviewed. Two of the people, Aliyah Khan, Professor Aliyah Khan, and Clemcy Charan, who has written a lot of, but there are others who helped me along the way, and some of them include the people who lived in Wismar. And so before coming here, some of those people actually came to the book launch in Toronto, and we had a launch in New York. And I have to say,
Some of those people who were there in 1964,
yes, that's right.
they were there at the book launch.
That's right. One of them in New York was the brother of the first person who was killed.
Yeah, that's my wife's cousin.
Yes.
In case you don't know.
And they actually...
You would
yes.
know that. The viewers would know that.
Yes. And in London, I mean, if people go to my Facebook page, there were a whole bunch of people who came out, went on stage, so they weren't concerned about me and presenting information about the book. The most emotional part of that event was having people come out, going on stage and talking about their own experience and so on. So I think the important part of this narrative for me is I focus on the silencing of, you know, Michel Trollo wrote a famous book, a Haitian anthropologist, called Silencing of the Past. So the one thing that troubled me a lot was the fact that I could not find information about the Wismar Massacre written in whether it's analytical form or being spoken, you know, by people who knew a lot about this. So the narrative did not exist. It either erased, it was silenced. So I felt that those victims deserve some kind of, you know, some kind of exposure to kind of tell their stories, because to me that whole history has been silenced along the way. So that theme runs through the actual book. This whole notion of silencing the events and what happened in Wismar. And I would say also, you had written something explaining why the silence existed. I don't know if you recall. I don't remember the exact date.
I read your book. I saw you made reference to mine.
Right, and one of the points you made was that after independence, after '64, we had a new government that took over, and a dictatorship was established. So the whole notion of, you know, airing grievances and so on, and reconciliation and discussion was silenced. So therefore, there were no discussion about these issues, and that includes the son Chapman also. So what happened is a whole set of narrative. On the one hand, the Wismar Massacre has been silenced and erased to a certain point, but we have another event, a very traumatic event, meaning the son Chapman event. You know, there's a lot of, in my investigation, I found that a lot of misinformation has been centered around that. We can talk about that, but I don't want that to make that a center of, you know, what I've done in this, you know, in this project.
I'm sure you would have heard, although you have met him, my co-host Leonard Craig. He's an economist.
Yeah, surely.
And I will now, I think I'm the exception here. I was born, I was very young in 1964. I don't think the two of you were born.
And that was, I'm 60, 1960.
Well, but he's a baby.
Okay.
He's a baby. So I'm the only one who was there in 1964 and witnessed it. I was the only one there, and I'm not featured in the book, although I helped to throw a bucket of water in people's houses. I'm only joking at the time you thought that.
Yeah.
The floor is open to my co-host, Leonard Craig.
Doc, would you, for the audience, share your background about why you come to write the book? And when I talk about your background, I mean, are you an academic? Are you a politician, a social? Well, just share your background.
Well, I may be a little bit of all of those, but I'm primarily a historian. I teach politics and history at Nassau Community College, right? I attended City College in New York, which is in the middle of Harlem, and then I went to New York University. I did my master's and doctorate there. So I am more of a historian, and that is what I love doing, writing about history, specifically Guyanese history. In this domain of looking at Indian history, because I believe there's a gap, right? We can write about, Guyanese history, yes, but when you look at the literature that exists, there is a gap that needs to be filled in terms of articulating the history of Indians. And the book that Freddie mentioned, I've never heard of these people, Prashad Nagar. I knew the place existed, but I didn't know about the background. Alice Bhagwande Singh, both of those books actually won the Guyana Prize for literature. Alice was the first Indian who wrote an autobiography in Guyana. She was born in Suriname, right? And I have my hands on that. The family gave me the autobiography, and it has a lot of details about the indenture system and so on. So it goes back to that historical era. Her husband, Jung Bahadur, was, he was a ship doctor when these ships were coming. And sometimes the ship doctor would be very important, because if there's an outbreak on the ship, you have to tell the captain, well, this is the problem, and this is what you have to do. So those things did not exist. So for me, it was a process of understanding Indian history, learning about history, and of course, Indian history is also Guyanese history, right? It's part and parcel of that. But I sort of situate myself to help fill that gap in terms of history.
I've read several. I've not read any of your books cover to cover, but I've read parts of it of several of them from time to time. And I've read a lot of your letters in the press from time to time. And some of the sentiment that seems to come over, and that when people respond to you, they respond using some of those sentiments as well.
Yes.
That you are an Indian activist, or I don't know if there's such a word as an Indianist, a person who not just study, but active in promoting Indianness. How do you describe yourself with respect to that?
Well, I mean, people can define me any way they want. I mean, my work is out there, it's in the public domain. But as I said, it's about writing about or filling a gap. Yeah, I mean, growing up in Guyana, we learned about, World War I, the Europeans and whatever. And again, I come back to the point that we did not learn about things that affect us, that is more dear to us. There was a historian, a Fijian historian, Brijlal, who said that we have to participate in writing and reconstructing our own history. And I think we don't have that. We have some great historians here. But I think the tools today that are available to us to be able to reconstruct our history, pulling it out from the archive and making it known, to the public, making sure it's getting into the curriculum and so on. I think that's important, because we need to know where we came from to know where we're going, right? We had the Enmore, Martha's, recognition. I believe it was yesterday. That's an important event that happened. So that obviously influenced, folks today. So history is important. You can't dissect what's there. The question you raise, yes, I do situate myself in looking at Indian history and trying to make that, to kind of unsilence that and digging it out from the archive and making it more understandable to who you are. And I think that's important. I mean, Rodney, when Rodney wrote whatever he was, he started out looking at, how Europe underdeveloped Africa, but Rodney understood who he was, right? So he wrote about that. So there's no harm in us doing that, writing about who we are. I mean, I don't know what Indian rights mean, but I have also been, like all of you here, being concerned about, how Guyana is developing politically. So yes, as a student, I have been involved in writing about things that I've seen. People have responded, and my work, again, is in the public domain,
How much academics are expected to declare their bias? How much of a bias, being an Indian, retelling stories from an East Indian perspective? Have you thought about how much bias you introduce into your research and your output? Have you thought it? Because I've done research myself, but obviously not in history
You
and
need
so
to
on.
write a book quickly.
But academics up front are asked to declare their bias or what could possibly affect how they research. Can you discuss?
But before you, I am not too sure academics are expected to declare their bias. This is the first time I've heard this.
The focus has to be
I think
methodology.
I think academics are expected to say what slant they're interested in or what area, but I've never heard someone say academics are
It's
expected.
a standard thing when you write journals and so on.
Okay, but let me say this, with this particular project, I took pains in the first chapter, and this may address part of what you're saying, to say that this is not a narrative that focuses on victimhood, right? One group claiming victimhood. Neither is it a narrative to allow one group to blame the others for the crimes perpetrated on their neighbors. Neither is it an argument to allow one group to emerge as a morally superior group. I've taken pains to that, and I've said that in a show with Vincent Alexander. He didn't have a problem regarding the Wismar Massacre. But you can say that, but I know what Freddie is saying. That answer has to do with the methodology you use, right? Because that's how you eliminate biases in the writing. So this project was vetted, by professors who are out there. Their names are on the back of, plus the names of all the people who reviewed part of the chapters are there, right? It's there. So the methodology that I've explained, you have to be careful. Let's see how you're collecting information. And I'll give you one example. If somebody says, well, A, B, C, D happened, right? You have to be able to confirm that actually happened. So one way you do that is you look at another person who maybe had the same experience, and then you kind of look at, if the information kind of connect. Or you look at the transcript that exists. We do have a transcript about all of this that we're talking about. So these are a mechanism by ways you can eliminate those biases, right? And prevent them from happening. Because you have others who peer reviewing scholars who are looking at what you wrote. So that would address that.
So your book is an academic book or just a social comment? How would you
I try not to make it because I like to make my work reader friendly. Now, the first chapter is maybe a little bit academic, but I try as best as I can. I mean, in that chapter, I presented a framework. In other words, to address some of the questions you raised as to how this project is being done and how am I going to get from A to B to C. So that's in the first chapter, so it's a little bit academic. But as you get to the second chapter, relaxed. Right, it creates the political environment from 1950 to 1964. That's the second chapter. And then there's a chapter that focuses now on the term that I use, ethnic cleansing, right? And let me just say, when I use that term, ethnic cleansing, I think that's a much of a more recognized word that's there. So the title of the book is A Case of Ethnic Cleansing. And the other thing I say is that another chapter has to do with the commission itself, because they produced the report. Then the next chapter has to do with the lived experiences of people, and I call them oral history interviews. People who were there, like a relative of Freddie's wife's cousin. So I have those interviews, they're there, so those are primary source information, right, which were recorded. I have them recorded and I have them transcribed in the back of the book. So you have all of that. And again, I want to come back to what I said. I'm trying to take myself out of this narrative so people will not be able to make the accusation that, okay, this thing might be biased. But yes, I get that. I get that.
Keenly aware of what is floating around out there.
I always tell kids,
interviewer, got to ask you the question.
Right, and I always tell kids, know something about the author who's putting those words on paper, and then you read the book. So that gives you a basis from which you can be critical, right? So instead of doing that, people are saying, well, they don't like the word, but you have to read the narrative first, and then you're in a better position to make critical assessment of the book. And then you can pelt me with any kind of questions you want.
Can I just make a correction, because I think people will be wondering, He couldn't be my wife's cousin.
I'm sorry, yes,
He
yes.
couldn't be my wife. Now, Iqbal, whose brother was the first person to die, Iqbal's father, Iqbal's photograph is in the book, and he was interviewed. Iqbal's father and my mother-in-law are first cousins. So Iqbal and my wife are second cousins. So let's get back to the interview proper. Now, there is, I don't think anyone watching this show, and it ends, and they will say, wait, there's a controversy going on. Aubrey Norton, the leader of the PNC, wrote a letter in Kaicho saying that you should not use the word massacre. Then Sharma Solomon, PNC parliamentarian, said, no, you can't use the word massacre. So I know the word massacre since I was young, and everybody just at a subliminal or Freudian level accept it. But since this book came out, there is an objection to the word massacre. I don't know if Craig wants to take up from there, or you want to
Well,
answer.
let me
Surely.
respond to that. Well,
No.
there are 12
Just-
words on the book cover, but some people are fixated on one word. Let me just say this, because people don't know this, because a lot of people don't read. The word massacre is what we have come to know this event as. Cherry Jagan has written about this. There are several, I don't remember the page right now.
Dozens of people have
Right.
reported from the 60s on.
Right, Raymond Ali, one of the student who had written about it, titled the Wismar Massacre. But interestingly enough, and I want to, and this is important, when you look at the transcript, Janet Jagan in her resignation letter used the word genocide.
Resignation as Home Affairs Minister.
Yes, right, yes. And she resigned because of what happened in Wismar, because the police were not responding to her and so on. We can get into that later. When you look at the draft and the notes, because the commissioners on this commission, they were going back and forth sending their notes. Harold Drayton, who was one of the commissioners who Chetty had brought back from Africa to build the University of Guyana, he was on the commission. And when you look at his notes, they use the word Holocaust. So you got massacre, Holocaust, genocide, and so on.
So hold for me.
Yeah.
You, in doing this book, you saw the notes that did not make it in the final report.
Well, the notes, it's in the archive right here. Harold Drayton put everything in a neat, in two boxes. It's in the archive. You can go look at it. Notes, and he has the actual, he has the X13 plan and all of those things in his notes. So it's there. So these are not my words. These are things that he made up. So you have that, right? I said that's the language that we know. A lot of Guyanese refer to it as the Wismar Massacre. Now, the other thing to remember is that, you know, this is an event when it occurred. Those people who are today responding to what happened, they are also using the same words. So they're kind of validating the use of that concept, right? But you have to read in the narrative to understand why why those people use those three heavy loaded words, right? Because they were thinking of the enormity of the events. So some people like to reduce it to the number of deaths. That's not the case. You know, in the Boston Massacre, as Harold Drayton's son pointed out, a handful of people were killed, but it was called a massacre. So it is the enormity of what happened, the arson, the burning of, we can get into a number of rapes.
You clearly define that in your book.
Yes, and the expulsion of 3,400 people, a minority community, which is a large number considering the fact that Guyana's population was about, what, you know, 500, even less than that, right? So it's the enormity of what that symbolized, right? The cleansing is a more appropriate word to use because it didn't exist when massacre was used, right? This has to do with the Yugoslavian.
The definition
yes,
of the term.
And I have a chapter on that, and I said, look, even the commissioners before they started interviewing before the 19 days of interviews that they did, they went to Wismar, Christiansburg, and Mackenzie. And they said, it's in the report, they said they could not see a single Indian walking around. So if that's not a cleansing, that is the language that they used. They saw a few working at Denver, and there was some...
Saw a few police.
Right.
officers
that's their
were in
words,
there.
right? But again, I want to emphasize it is the enormity, not the number of people, right? And
I didn't get a chance to read your book, right? So that aspect of the contents of it is...
He said earlier most people don't read. Does that include you?
No, I didn't see the book. I don't
No,
have
he said
access.
most people don't read.
No, if I have access to the book, I surely
well,
will read
you
it
like
from
to
the
go on
front to the
social
back.
media and look at pictures, but
You can
But-
get one, you have 10,000, you know? No, he has it
Well,
in
you
his
can borrow
hotel.
Freddie.
He has
That's
it
all
in
right,
his
that's
hotel.
all right. We'll deal with that afterwards. Let's just get through this. Now, I am coming here, I'm interviewing you from two perspectives. One, as an interviewer, and the other perspective, they are counter narratives.
yes.
And I wouldn't be a competent interviewer if I don't introduce those things to you.
All right, let's hear them.
And so I hope you appreciate it from
Yes.
that aspect.
Yeah.
And Freddie mentioned Aubrey Norton earlier and several others. Even UC Guyana wrote that there
No
is
guilty race.
no guilty race.
That's the
and
name
things
of
like
his
that.
book.
And you indicated,
But Quine is a biased man. Anyway,
indicated that the term Wismar Massacre became, it just rolled off the tongue and it became
Just
the widely used word,
accepted in
and
the
then it
literature.
became accepted.
Right.
Don't you think, as an academic, in my reading of it, the word massacre originated from politicians who are deeply affected, and that would affect anybody. And they blurt out these terms of emotional distraught and indignation and so on. Blurt out these terms, and they're political people, and they got pandered to a gallery.
the word originated from politicians. Anyway, go on.
No. When it is applied to Linden, from my understanding, it was first used by Chedi, by Dr. Jagan.
Yes, in his book,
Right?
there's several pages in his book where he
Right.
referred to what happened.
And that's what I'm saying. He was
Distraught
out
at
of
what
an
happened.
emotional response. Now, you as an academic, don't you think that one, I'm asking a two-part question here. As an academic, you should stick to the clear academic delineation and definition of a massacre, one. And two, since the subject, because when you read these back what's been going on, people are saying, or it seemed to be, that massacre only attached to what occurred to East Indians. And in that same period, just days before and days after, in between there, right? Because I read the report, 3 people were killed. Then you have the blowing up of the launch. I can't remember what's the number, 38 or something like that. People died. And then there was a response. So it was a series of events. Why do we separate and refer to it as a massacre and then leave out?
Well, the word massacre I've explained why.
Yeah, I understand.
Right?
The enormity of
right,
the event.
enormity. So,
and the Boston Massacre.
right, so I'm not going to quibble with that. That's
Yeah,
what,
yeah, understood.
Right, but I've addressed the words. I have in the last chapter, I looked at genocide and so on. I've used pogrom. I said those words are used interchangeably. But I stuck with, in the last chapter, I said this is more of an ethnic cleansing based on everything we know, because that's a word that became more known, you know, after the breakup of Yugoslavia. But no, I'm not going to shift that. But I would put the question to you, well, what do you call it? What word would you want me to use based on what you know?
No.
If I'm saying, if we keep focusing on 3 people, right? What about the buildings that were burned and the people who were raped and all of these other things? Because when you focus on that number, you don't get the, actually there was 5 people, 2 of them were Africans, and they were looting, and they met their death. One of them was in a burning building, right? Norton didn't say that.
So the one in the burning building was looting? I thought that person was...
Well, in the report it says they were looting, and one of them tried to burn the police station down in Wismar, which was the safe haven, the only place you could go unless you got over to the river to the other side, right? But again, I'm going to stick with that word because I think it's appropriate, because the majority of Guyanese knew what that term referred to, right? So if we're going to sort of minimize that and focus on the number, then we're not looking at the enormity. So that, I think that has to come out. Now, you bring up some other things which I think is important to clarify. The governor, Governor Late, in his secret telegram to London, says that this was the single most terrible event. I don't know if those were the exact words, but it's quoted in the book. The single most terrible event that occurred in Wismar. That's what he referred to when we talk about the Wismar Massacre, because he knew, and in his telegram he was sending information about all the other things that happened and that were happening. Yes, I will agree with you that there were tit for tat happening in the coastal area. People were seeking haven, right, in an adjacent village where they could go, where those people, where the villages had majority people who looked like them. Yes, all of those were happening, right? But to come back to Wismar now, like I said, there was no place where you could go except out, right? But this was a very planned attack. To use the commissioner's report, it was organized and well organized, right? So it was really a cleansing, as the commissioners saw and reported when they went there. So now to come back to the other event now, and since you bring it up, I do want to address it. Guyana, Sidney King then wrote a letter when he heard that the commission was being formed. And his letter, and this is also in Harold Drayton's notes, I have a copy of it in the book. He wrote Drayton because he believed that Harold Drayton was the most, Harold Drayton has a reputation. He was a professor and so on. He was helping to build UG, one of the most influential members of the commission. See, and he said to him, wash your hands. In other words, he's telling Harold Drayton not to give credibility to this commission. Of course, the British were doing the same thing. The British were concerned about who is going to be on this commission, because they wanted to make sure that the British, the police and so on, did not look terrible, because they were running the show. We were still a colony, right? So they tried to manipulate and try to get some of those people on and off. They tried to find ways to discredit the commission and so on. But the government persisted, and eventually you had that commission that was established. So I said Guyana sent a letter, and this was in '64, right? Guyana didn't want the commission to go on. But I want to address, since you bring it up, because like I said, there's a lot of misconception about the Son Chapman. So let me address that so people can understand. And again, what I'm saying here, it's all in the reports, and you can find that is documented in the book. So the Son Chapman, 43 Africans were killed. It's a terrible tragedy, and if nobody says that, then they don't have a heart. It is a terrible tragedy. 43 Africans were killed on this boat, right? So let me say a few things about the Son Chapman. There was a person named Dimitri Alikak, whose family goes back to the origin, the building of Mackenzie, right, and Christiansburg and so on. One of the things he confirmed to me was that it was well known that Norman Yakub Chapman, who owned the boat, was a member of the PNC. That was a given, everybody knows that. It is also known that the Son Chapman was ferrying explosives. How do we know? There's a letter in the release files where Premier Chedi Jagan sent this letter, very short letter, to his Home Affairs.
Let me cut you. It's in a book edited by...
It's in the release files.
And it's in a book edited by Mr. Jagan called Selected Correspondence of Premier Jagan.
Yes, and I reproduce it in my book also. So here's the point about that. So Chedi this is a year before Son Chapman. he's sending that letter to his Home Affairs Minister, Janet Jagan, basically saying, look, he named the boat by name. He says there's a boat called Chapman, and that boat is ferrying explosives. He's got a report that is ferrying. This is a year before all of this happened, right? So that I don't know what Janet Jagan did because she was new to the job, so I don't know what came out of that, right? So here's the other thing to know about.
But wait a minute. There is a letter from Jagan to the Commissioner of Police.
Yes,
about,
he did that also.
Yeah, about
right. He would have sent that to his
the dynamite.
Right, to his Home Affairs Minister also, because he wanted to keep everybody in the loop. So we know that much, right? So here's the other thing about with the son Chapman. Harold Drayton was asked about an inquiry into the son Chapman, right? So the question was put to him that, okay, you have, Wismar inquiry. What about this other event that happened on July 6th? He said that if there was a smoking gun here, or if Barnum felt that there was something that was happening here, he would have set up a commission of inquiry when he came into office after the 1964 elections. That didn't happen, right? Now, here's the other thing to note about the son Chapman, which people don't know. Again, they don't read.
Second time you say people don't read.
Yeah, well, there was an inquest into the son Chapman led by PM Birch Smith. Chetty had recommended Birch Smith to be on the Wismar Commission, but he couldn't get a release, right, at that time from his, illegal jobs or whatever he was
a
doing.
magistrate or something,
Right,
I think.
yes. So there was an inquest held. 60 witnesses appeared during this inquest, right? And there was no evidence of human sabotage. I think Freddie wrote about this recently. There's two theories about this. Either there was human sabotage, well, when they say human sabotage, they're trying to blame the PPP
Somebody.
or Indians, whatever,
Okay.
right? And that's the narrative, again, because of what happened since then that they've sold about the son Chapman. There's no evidence of that, right? So the point about that is that, so that's one theory, so there's no evidence. And then the other theory is that there were explosives situated in the engine room. Now, again, Chetty Jagan in 1963, a year before, wrote about that, right? So we have all of those things about the son Chapman. And I don't want to get into more of it, but except to say one more thing about son Chapman. When the son Chapman happened, this is July 7th, right? July 7th. Between 5 and 6 p.m., again, a terrible tragedy as the bodies were being pulled out. Between 5 and 7, mobs in Mackenzie, and again, this is on the Mackenzie side, not on the Christianborg or Wismar side, right? Because these were people who were re-invited by Demba to come back to work, right, in that area. So within those 2 hours, more people were killed.
Yeah, 5.
Right, so 5 Indians were, they had nothing to do with any of this. In fact, some of them were helping the victims, right? One of them was a boy of 10 years old. His name is Morris Bacchus. Morris Bacchus stepped into the melee to save his sister, who was 3 years old, right? And again, all of this is in the medical report. It's also in a submission from the Mackenzie doctors, right? Remember the commission began hearing, November, so both incidents would have already happened. So the medical doctors submitted that information to the commission, so that's there, right? And that's also, I have that in the back of the book. So we can go on and talk about it, but what I'm saying is there's a lot of misinformation. And I think when people, I'll give you another example about son Chapman, I'm gonna end here. One of the questions I posed to Sharma Solomon, I think he was the mayor at that time when I interviewed him, and also Aubrey Norton and
For this book.
Yes.
He lists the number of people he interviewed.
And Deron Adams. He didn't know anything about this, so that shows you another example of silencing. But one of the questions I posed to them, I said, look, I've looked at all the speeches made when you have the memorial for the son Chapman, and nobody has ever to the fact that there were people living here who were driven out. No mention of that. I put that to Dr. Adams, Vincent Adams. Interesting about Vincent Adams.
He's
I
from
did
that
interview.
area, right?
Yes, Christian boy. His wife is Indian. Dad is African. And he told me, and he told David Hines, you can go back and look at David Hines' show, that when this thing happened, his mother, they had to hide his mom and the kids and get the security force to protect them and maybe escort them. That was how intense this was. I'm going to end that by saying this. There are Africans, right? There are some of them who did assist at the risk of their own lives. Even Janet Jagan wrote about that. Their homes were either burned or they were forced to leave Wismar, right? Again, that's the intensity of what you have happening. But the commission says in very clear language, there was no example where Indians, any Indian
report has at least one. A guy had a
that
gun
would have been, but
and he
you
was-
will.
No, I'm talking about the report itself.
Right, but I don't know if that's confirmed. There was one person who had a gun,
A gun,
but I
and
don't
then
know if
the
that's
police
confirmed.
met him and he had fired a few shots and
Right,
something.
because they try to bring in other people who they interviewed and so on. But they were, I mean, you're
But
looking
you're
at.
saying that wasn't confirmed?
I don't know if
It's
that
in
was.
the
I don't
report.
think it's in the report, but I don't know if that was confirmed where he attacked other people. And right, that's my point.
Okay.
So that's the and again we're looking at 3,400 people, a lot of people, right? But you guys have not asked me about the Wismar Massacre, why that term sticks and why it's significant. But again, I do want to repeat that it's the unsilencing of the voices of the victims, because if the book has an effect in any way, for me, it's looking at how many people are coming forward to tell their own stories, their lived experience. They were there, and they're talking about family member and what happened and so on. But when we talk about the enormity of this tragedy, we talk about the 200 houses being burned. There was, 87 businesses, all Indian businesses. One of the biggest business person there was Lal Tapal. I interviewed his son. It's in the book. He started off selling clothing on the street. Then he got a stall. But nobody talks about any of that, right? And then you have
something I didn't know for a long time. Maybe I only learned of it about 4 years ago, that Tulsi Prasad establishment.
Yes, Tulsi Prasad had a...
Tulsi Prasad himself
Yes. Yes, Tulsi Prasad had a concession. They started out doing logging and so on, and he had a base there where they stored gasoline and so on. But Tulsi was targeted. He was in a restaurant, Mr. Lam's restaurant, with his workers, and he testified in front of the commission. He said they threw acid, but that acid was they meant to kill him, right? But one of his workers were caught with the acid, and they had to get him out, and they had to sneak him out, right, to get him out of there. So he did testify. So that's, and again, these are all, if people read Freddie, it's all in the report, it's online. But to come back to this whole notion of silencing this event, this report was given in January 1965 to the new government. It was dead upon arrival. No discussion. You will not find this report in the parliamentary archive. Nobody seems to know where it is. Odin Ismail, the PPP ambassador
to Kuwait.
Right, give it to his son, Safraz, who transcribe it and put it online. So that's where you will be able to see the report, as well as the thousands of pages of transcript, people who testified, and not just victims, but police officers and so on, and members of the military, right, and so on. Now, can I go on? You want me to?
Yeah, it's your,
Let me inject with a question.
Okay.
It's your program.
There's a monument to Son Chapman and
Yes.
what happened. And you're saying because these voices were silenced, there's no memorial anywhere in Linden concerning that.
No, nowhere. Well, what I'm saying is that
do you support the establishment of such a memorial in this
I'll
day?
tell you what people are telling me. They're talking about doing a documentary. They're talking about doing a memorial. Some people mention having it at the Rumfeld, where the ships came and they landed, the industrial site, which is very different today. Some people are talking about doing a movie. Some people are talking about reparations, compensation. Because remember, a lot of these people, including a relative, well, I don't want to mention a name here. These people, when they left, they never went back. talk about, you know, Richard Kahn and so on. They don't know what happened to their land, right? So they've never went back. They just turned it back and they left, right? So the point I was making about the memorial is that when I believe it was 2011, Granger said, if I come to power, I'm going to establish a memorial for Son Chapman, and he hoped that a lot of people will come, right? My point about that is, if you're talking about that and you're concerned, even as a politician, about reconciliation and having a Truth and Reconciliation Commission and putting yourself in the shoe of the other people and reaching out and really move Guyana forward in unity, then acknowledge what was done in that community that you. That is not happening. There are people today who are threatening me online. This book belongs in a bonfire, right? It should not
that is
be
expected.
right,
Well,
right.
okay,
And some of them have said, okay, we'll contact the ERC, and then it shouldn't be sold in any. So that's what I'm saying. That's the kind of reaction you get. Instead of inviting me to come on your show and have a decent discussion and we can interact, but you have the opposite thing happening, right? So can I touch upon the enormity a little bit about?
You can touch on anything.
Yeah.
This is the you're the guest.
But I want to make
The
sure you
60
understand,
minutes
right?
are yours.
The whole notion of a massacre, right? So one of the most troubling things for me reading this, and I have to tell you, when I was a kid, I used to ask my parents about this Wismar thing, this Wismar Massacre, whatever. But when that question come up, or those two words, there was a look on their face. And my brother explained, he's a psychologist, he said that may be a reaction to some kind of trauma or learning about the trauma of what happened. So part of the trauma has to do with the most difficult aspect of this that I had to deal with, which is that looking at the trauma that was meted out to the Indian woman. And I want to talk a little bit about that. And I know this will be troubling to a lot of people, but I think sometimes you have to be able to deal with the information to be able to say, yes, okay, it happened, okay, let's acknowledge, and therefore let's move on and build a one Guyana and move forward, and everybody can grow and live happily ever, and so on. So here I want to say about this, now when you read the report, if you have the time, I didn't have the time to do this, but when you look at the witnesses' testimonies, there are many places, I'm talking with a woman now, right, where they describe incidents happening to women, right, that they saw, right? Now, and there may be many, people will tell you that. Evan Prasad said there were many, he must have looked through the report. I can't say it because of what I do, right? You want to be accurate in terms of what you're reporting. The medical report